Hi everyone, Sarah here, your English coach, helping you to develop the communication skills, confidence and fluency you need to speak freely at work so you can thrive in your career in the UK. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss any tips on how to develop your English skills. Let's get started.
Today I want to talk about something that may be holding you back in your professional communications, and that's grammar mistakes. Now, if you speak English as an additional language, you might find that when you speak, other people aren't quite sure what you're saying. They get an idea, but they don't 100% understand. This could be due to pronunciation, it could be due to mistakes in vocabulary, but it could also be due to grammar mistakes. Or maybe you know the grammar, but when it comes to speaking, you hold back because you're not 100% sure if that's the right thing to say in that situation and you don't want to make a mistake. Either way, it's stopping you from communicating. Working with lots of clients from around the world, I've noticed that there are three main reasons why they make grammar mistakes, and a slightly different approach is needed to correct these mistakes. The first reason is simple. You simply don't know the grammar rule. Maybe you studied grammar many years ago, maybe you've never studied grammar, and there's a gap in your knowledge. This is quite common, even when I work with clients with an advanced level of English. They've learned to communicate, but there's still some gaps in their grammar knowledge. If this is the case, then we need to learn those rules. But I would recommend learning those grammar rules in context. Rather than just learning different structures, you need to gain a clear understanding of how to use it in context. For book recommendations, a great one will always be Grammar in Use by Murphy. I'll put the link to the book in the description. This is good because it introduces grammar rules but also gives examples of how to use it in context. However, I wouldn't just stop there. Once you learn what the structure is and you can learn how to recognize it, pay attention to where it is used. For example, when you're reading in English, or you're watching a podcast in English, or even you're just listening to your colleague speak. This is a crucial step because once you understand how the grammar is used in real life, it will help you to apply it accurately when you're speaking. The second type of mistake happens when you know the grammar rule. Maybe you've studied it and you could even do a gap fill activity and get the answer correct. However, you struggle to use it in real life, real conversations. You have this knowledge of grammar, but when it comes to speaking, you just use very simple sentences and simple structures. This is an extremely common one and is often related to how we learn languages at school. Often we have to memorize grammar rules and do gap fill exercises, but rarely actually apply them and use them in speaking. Maybe in writing, but less so in speaking. For example, when it comes to tenses, maybe you know the past perfect tense. This is a common tense we can use when talking about things that have happened in the past. Maybe you know this in theory, but when it comes to telling stories and talking about things in the past, you don't even think about using this tense. Your brain just automatically uses past simple and you explain it in a very simple way, which is fine. But it's frustrating when you know it, but you don't actually use it. The problem here is we have a passive understanding of the grammar. We know how to use it logically. However, we've not activated it. We know it, but we don't use it. It's not there ready to be used when we speak or write automatically. The key here is to activate what we know in writing and in speaking. How do we do this? Well, deliberate practice where you think, okay, I'm going to practice using the past perfect tense. What do I mean by the past perfect tense? Well, we use this tense when we're telling a story to show that an action in the story came before the main action. Let me give you an example. You might be telling a little story about when you left your phone at home. You say, yesterday I drove to work. When I got to work, I realized that I had left my phone at home. Had left is the past perfect. And we say this because the leaving the phone happened before you realized. First you drove to work, you got to work, you realized that you had left your phone at home. If you haven't practiced using it, this tense, it might not come naturally. So we need to do deliberate practice. First, you could practice writing stories and paying attention to using this tense. Then you could practice saying these stories out loud. The more you have practice time, the more automatic it will become. So when you're in real life and you're telling those stories, it will come out without thinking about it. The third kind of mistake is probably the most frustrating. And this is what we often call fossilized mistakes. We say fossilized because these are mistakes that just come out automatically. You might know the grammar. In fact, it's frustrating because often it's quite easy beginner grammar, but it just comes out automatically. And we can feel really self-conscious about these, that people will judge us because it seems such a simple mistake. The first reason is often that you made this mistake in the beginning, you were never corrected, you never really noticed, and so your brain has made these connections. For example, say you know consciously that when you tell a story in the past, just use the past form of the verbs, okay? It doesn't even have to be past perfect, just the past simple. Maybe you never really studied the grammar or you didn't know the past form of some of the verbs. So for many years, you just use the present. So it's become a habit. Our brain has formed those connections. So when we talk about the past, the present form of the verb comes out automatically. It's frustrating when you know it's a mistake. And the second reason is that when you're in the flow of speaking, so you haven't fully activated the grammar that you've learnt, then your brain often defaults to the grammar of your first language. Let's imagine in your first language, you don't differentiate between he and she. So when you're speaking to someone, maybe you automatically mix these up and you might not even notice. Now, these mistakes happen because your brain is taking a shortcut. Either it's already made these connections in the past, so it's created strong links in the brain, or when you're in the flow and you're not really thinking about it, your brain defaults to the grammar of your first language. Note as well that if you have gaps in your grammar or you've not fully activated the grammar, then your brain is more likely to default to the grammar of your first language. So how do we correct these fossilized, annoying mistakes? Well, the first step is awareness. And this is where recording yourself speaking and listening back is going to really, really help you. Now, I know you don't like the sound of your own voice. Neither do I. I don't think there's many people in the world that really like the sound of their own voice on a recording. However, you'll get used to it and it will be so valuable. It's amazing when my clients first do this and they start to notice the mistakes that they make and they think, I didn't even know I did that, but it could be quite common. When you notice your own mistakes, it's a lot easier to correct because there is a note in your mind. Of course, having someone else correcting you is valuable as well, but it doesn't always have the same power as when you notice it by yourself. So those are the three main reasons why you may be making grammar mistakes. a gap in your knowledge, you've not activated it, or you have these fossilized mistakes that you know is a mistake you're just not aware of. And remember, grammar is all about communicating clearly and more precisely. This said, don't get so obsessed about making grammar mistakes that you don't speak at work or you hesitate to say your point. In real life, focus on the message, worry less about mistakes, but in your practice time, this is when you can notice and work on correcting them. Thanks very much for watching. In my one-to-one coaching programs, grammar is a big part of what we do. Even the most advanced speakers have gaps in their knowledge or are making some basic mistakes that they want to correct to give them more confidence. If this is something you need help with, let's have a chat. I'll put a link to book a free trial session in the description. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you on the next video.